Okay, so while our blade is being tempered in the oven, we can begin to work on our handle. And I've got a stub end here of a piece of walnut that we use for the knife shop in Indianapolis. And it's got a crack in it here and here, but I don't need that much of it. I only need about that much to make my handle. And I'm going to cut 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches square out of this thing to start off with. Okay, so I went ahead and trimmed 3/4 off of both sides just to get myself closer to what I want so I could hand shape the handle instead of lathe turning it. All right, so we ended up boring our hole off center a little bit because the chucks and the lathe just wouldn't adjust right. But that's not a big deal because I can cut the off center portion off of this and I still have plenty of handle here to shape. The important thing is to get a pass-through hole that's in a straight line and not off at an angle. Okay, so the next step in the puzzle here is we've got our hole drilled through. And now we need to widen it out a little bit so that that V shape will fit down inside there so that we can seat it all the way down to the edge of that ricasso with our tang sticking out the back end. So we need to open this up a little bit. There's a lot of different ways you could do that. You can burn that in if you want to, which is not my preferred method. Or you can just take a smaller drill bit and start to kind of ease a recession in that on both sides and wallow it out a little bit, and then take a hand file and get it the rest of the way. And that's the way I prefer to do it. So that's what we're going to do now. Okay, now there's a couple things we want to look at here. First of all, we want to make sure that we're straight in the handle. We want to make sure that we're deep enough in the handle. And we can go a little bit deeper than this because we're going to pop it on there just a little bit harder to seat it well. And we only need enough tang sticking out to peen over. So now we need to think about, first of all, going ahead and doing our final grind that we're going to do on this blade before we do our final sharpening. Then we're going to tape this blade up, and we'll work on getting the handle on it and everything else. And then once we get the handle shaped in, we can pull the tape off and do the final on our blade. So this is where we're at right now. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to take the blade out of our handle material, and we want to do the final grind on our blade edge here. That's going to bring it to the point where all we want to do is hit it on the buffer, and it's going to be razor sharp. So we're going to put it right back on the jig, and we're going to be very cognizant of the pressure we put on it, obviously. But we've also changed to a very tight grain or a very fine grain belt at the same time. And it's also worn down quite a bit, so it's not going to chew much off. All we're really trying to do now is polish that edge up a little bit and take that black off of it from the forging process, because we had it pretty well down to that wire edge before we even heat treated it. So here we go. It's pretty simple. Again, we're going to go over to one side or the other depending on which side our ricasso is on. And I'm just going to kind of keep my eyes on everything at the same time here. And I'm making really, really light passes on that thing. Really, really light passes. Okay? Just to clean it up. Okay. I'm going to flip that dude over to the other side now. Get that done. Again, we'll move the belt over to the opposite side now. You're always going to have one side that you seem to grind better on than the other side. Just seems to be inherent that way. And if you've got just a little bit of dark haze on there, but you still got your wire edge, don't worry about that because that's going to come off in the buffing process anyway in the end. Okay, once we get to that point, you see where we're at. Like I said, that gray haze can be knocked off very easily with the buffer. So don't worry about that if you've got your wire edge. Now all I'm going to do is come up here and I'm going to cover this blade with tape so that I don't do any damage to the blade while I'm working on the handle, and at the same time I don't do any damage to myself while I'm working on shaping the handle and things like that. So I'm just wrapping tape around it fairly loose all the way up the blade. This blue painting style tape works really, really well for this. I usually do a double wrap on there, just like that, and then tear it off. And then I'll get that off later on after I'm done with everything else. But that protects us and the blade for the remainder of this process until we're ready to final sharpen our blade. Okay, so we've pushed our handle back onto our blade. We don't have it seated all the way down yet. And we've also got a washer that I've put right over the top of this, just a steel washer. And what I really want to happen is I'm going to cut enough of this tang off so that this will actually seat down to the bottom, and in the end we can paint it over so it looks like a more finished tool, and you can see the tang all the way through the back of the handle when we're done. So we're just double checking everything as we go, making sure we've got plenty of handle before we go too far, make sure it's plenty big enough for our hands, and then we're going to start shaping our handle after we glue it up. Okay, so to get this thing right now and get this down where we need it, first of all we need to reduce this tang a little bit more, and then we need to cut it off a little bit as well before we get everything epoxied and seated in permanently. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that with the handle on so I can kind of see where I'm at. Then I'm going to pull the handle off and make the reduction that I need to get that washer over the top so we can eventually paint it over in the end. And I'm going to put the heavy belt back on the grinder for that because I need mass material removal now. So I'm just going to turn it on, butt this up against it. And if I give myself a little excess, that's okay, because I can always grind it off after the fact. So now I'm going to pull the handle off, and I'm going to do the reduction on the tang that I need to do to make sure that I can get that washer on there. Again, having this blade taped up is what makes it safe to do this stuff. Okay, I'm going to use a 2-part epoxy on this, and I'm going to use a Gorilla brand epoxy that sets in 5 minutes, but I'm going to give it quite a bit more time than that. But the 5 minutes is a good rule of how much time you got to mess around getting this done before you have to use it. And we can just use the epoxy wrapper itself to mix this on. So it's real simple. It's 2 parts. You just push this plug out of the center, which gives you something that you can seal it back up with after use. You pop this plug off the bottom and that opens it up. You squeeze equal parts of it onto the surface. And then I tend to wipe the excess off real quick and shove the cap back into it just to seal it up. And then you need to mix this really, really well. And it starts to turn like a snot color. And that's what you want. Now you can come over here and begin to coat the tang really well first of all. That's what I like to do. Then I generally will take this thing and set it off to the side for a minute where it's not going to drip on anything. And I'll take a lot of this and I'll try to push it down into the hole itself to where it can drip down in there. And I save myself just a little bit in the end to cap it off with. And I'll show you what I mean by cap it off here in just a minute. But we're going to shove that down inside there and get it seated really well. And now what we're going to do with this to cap it off, what I mean by cap it off is I want a little bit of epoxy right here on the outside just to make sure that I've got that space closed in. And just maybe a little hair of a bubble over the top of it. And we'll grind that off later anyway. But it doesn't hurt anything to have it on there while it's drying. So I take any excess I've got, and that's where I put it. And then I just let it drip out the bottom, and I don't worry about that part. And now we'll put this in a vise, and we'll let it set up.